Hey, what's up everyone? My name is Nicholas Warner, and in today's video, I'm going to be reviewing the new 10mm f2.8 0D lens from LAOWA. If you're not familiar, LAOWA is a third-party lens manufacturer based out of Hong Kong, probably most famous for their wide probe lens. However, they also make a ton of other macro and wide-angle lenses, such as this one. Now, I'm a Sony shooter, so I'm using their E mount. However, they also make an autofocus for Nikon Z mount, as well as a manual focus version for Canon RF and Leica and Panasonic L mounts. So I've had this lens for a couple of months now, and I've taken it out with me all over the Southwest, from White Pocket to Zion National Park to Death Valley. I also had a chance to use it on a workshop I was leading with my buddy Kevin McNeil on the Oregon coast. And long story short, I really like the lens. It's definitely a go-to. It's earned a permanent spot in my camera bag with a few caveats. So let's go ahead and get into it. First off, with build quality. Overall, the build quality of this lens is honestly really good. Probably the first thing you'll notice is this interesting metal finish or metal casing on the lens. It's a little bit unique in the fact that it's blue. I don't think I've ever seen a blue camera lens before. And you'll notice around the edge, it's almost like a play on the red ring that Canon has, except it's a dark blue ring. Really interesting, but it's not an obnoxious blue finish. It looks really nice. Overall, it weighs pretty good too. It's just under a pound, so it's not too heavy. But it's also not light enough that it feels cheap in your hands either. One really cool thing about this lens is just how small this front lens element is. It's really interesting, especially when I compare it to like a Sigma lens here or a traditional wide angle lens. You can see how bulbous traditional wide angle lens is compared to just how small it is on the LAOWA. But the cool part about this is that because it's so small, it allows it to accept traditional screw-on filters without having to resort to one of those really clunky systems that I don't think a single person in existence wants to carry to put a filter on their wide-angle lens. The one aspect of build quality that comes up a little bit short is the rear lens cover. You can see here, if I turn this to the loose position, it just falls right off the lens. And it's been coming out in my camera bag, which is pretty annoying. So I actually took the lens cover off of an old Samyang lens that I had and put it on, and that stays on much tighter, which is a little bit silly because Samyang is a super budget lens company, and that somehow works better than this lens, which costs significantly more. The focus ring on this lens feels really nice in your hands. I like how smooth it feels. And this is a very small and subtle difference, but I just want to compare that to a Sigma lens here where you have kind of this plastic or rubber polymer grip to the focus ring. And I know that for me on a lot of these other cameras, when I'm outdoors and shooting in the field in kind of rough conditions, I noticed that after a few years, these lenses or the focus rings on these lenses sometimes build up a little bit of funk, or I notice that it starts to peel off. And because this is completely metal, I don't see that happening with this lens. Now, this is the autofocus model, which I will say is a little bit loud. Now, I'm not counting this as a negative. I'm just saying that it is noticeable, especially compared to first-party lenses. It is, though, very fast and accurate. I have not had any issues when choosing focus or when trying to select focus with this lens. It has never failed and said a spot was in focus when it really wasn't. Focuses very accurately from close to far and also does so really well in low light. So the big question everyone is asking is, you have this 10mm lens. It's got a ridiculous 130-degree field of view. It goes down all the way to f2.8. So how is the image quality? Now, overall, I have to say it's pretty good with a few caveats. Wide open from f2.8 all the way up to like f4 or so. The center of the frame is going to be very sharp. However, there is a noticeable amount of softness along the edges, which I do believe is in part to how much this lens stretches the edges of the frame. Now, you can combat this a little bit by stopping down. However, on most lenses that I own, you can stop down f14, f16, sometimes even f18 without any diffraction or noticeable drop off in sharpness. However, this lens exhibits noticeable diffraction past f11. This isn't a deal breaker. However, it is a little bit frustrating, and what it translates to is having to apply some sharpening when I am processing my images. This lens also exhibits some pretty extreme chromatic aberrations that I was not expecting. Now, for most of these situations, you can go ahead and just click on that Remove Chromatic Aberration button in Lightroom or Camera Raw. However, if you're shooting in super high contrast situations, you will oftentimes have to correct this manually. So on a more positive note, when talking about the distortion, this lens actually has almost zero barrel distortion, which is where the 0D part of its name comes from. However, that is not entirely true. It has zero barrel distortion, but it actually has pretty significant distortion around the edges, or it stretches the frame of the edges really, really wide. And this is actually something that I really, really enjoy. It's actually one of the reasons I bought the lens. I absolutely love wide angle lens photography. And for me, when you're shooting things like mountains or out in the Southwest where I live, where there's a lot of hoodoos and interesting rocks, if you get these extreme angles and kind of tilt the camera down, especially when you're in portrait mode, these things become really, really distorted and almost stretched out to the point where they look larger than life. And that's actually one of my favorite aspects of this lens. LAOWA advertises this lens as having a minimum focusing distance of 12 centimeters. However, this isn't really the case, because when I first read this, I thought, okay, 12 centimeters in front of the lens. However, this is actually 12 centimeters in front of the camera's sensor. So in reality, this is actually a minimum focusing distance of about 1.5 inches, which is ridiculously impressive, making it almost like a macro lens, which I have been super stoked about. It should be noted though that with such a short minimum focusing distance, there is some pretty extreme focus breathing that you need to account for if you plan on focus stacking. The autofocus model of this lens has 5 aperture blades, which results in a 10-point Sunstar, which honestly, I'm being 100% serious, I actually really love. It's probably one of my favorite Sunstars for any lens that I have. I just really like how it's not too distracting, especially compared to a Sony or a Sigma or a Canon lens, which often has more aperture blades. I just find that this one, it gives a really nice look with the sunbursts or the Sunstars without being so distracting by having too many points. So speaking of stars, one of the things I was excited about with this lens before purchasing it was the, potential for astrophotography. However, after using it, I have to be honest that this is probably the weakest point of the lens. At f2.8, the lens is quite sharp in the center. However, it is noticeably soft around the edges, and in the corners, you do get some very strong chroma. Honestly, I don't really see myself using this lens for astrophotography. I am, though, leading a workshop in Alaska this winter for the Northern Lights, so I'm excited to see how it does then. So how much does this lens cost? Well, at $800, it is definitely not a budget lens, but I also don't think it's too expensive for what you get either. For comparison, the only full-frame 10mm first-party lens is the Canon 10-20 f4, and it's nearly 3 times the price at $2,300. The closest lens Sony offers is their 12-24mm f2.8, which is a whopping $3,000. At the end of the day, I do think this is a good deal and a good value for what you get. The last thing I have to talk about is availability, because I ordered this lens the day it became available for pre-order, and I received it 2 months after others received their first copy. Now, I'm not sure what's going on, if there's issues with manufacturing or production, but that just seems like a really long time to wait. And even if you go to their website, they're still saying that if you order today expect to receive your lens by August. The main thing people want to know is it worth it? And for me, I have to say, this is not a paid review at all. This is 100% worth it for me. I absolutely love this lens. It has definitely earned a permanent spot in my camera bag. I really enjoy it. That being said, of course, it does have some downfalls. The image quality isn't great. It's not really awesome for astro. However, as a wide angle lens, I love what it can do. I love the stretched distortion around the edges. I love the incredible minimum focusing distance. It is just a really, really cool lens, and it opens up a lot in terms of creativity with wide angle photography. I also think it would make a great street photography lens, and I am excited to see its potential in terms of macro wildlife. I have a trip planned to Costa Rica, and I'm excited to see how it works if I can get in close to like some dart frogs or some snakes to be able to get kind of the macro usage out of the lens. That being said, 10 millimeters, 130 degree field of view, obviously this is not for everyone. If you're like me though, and you like wide angle and ultra wide angle landscapes, then this is a fantastic lens. If you want to check out some test images, you can actually head down to a link in the description where I actually have some full resolution test images for you to download and pixel peep for yourself. So once again, I hope you learned something new. Thank you for watching, and I hope you have a great rest of your day.